Tyler Bennett had been staring at his phone for the past 20 minutes, parked outside Giovanni's, one of the fanciest restaurants in the city. The kind of place where you needed a reservation 3 weeks in advance and the bread probably cost more than his lunch. His work boots were still dusty from the construction site, and he'd barely had time to change into the one decent button-down shirt he owned. This had to be a prank. It had to be. 3 days ago, his buddies from the site had shown him the dating profile during lunch break. They'd been messing with his phone while he was operating the crane, and somehow managed to set him up on some intergalactic dating app. The whole thing was absurd. An alien military commander seeking a human companion for what the profile called cultural exchange and potential family bonding. The profile picture showed this massive purple-scaled warrior woman covered in medals, looking like she could bench press a truck. Tyler had laughed it off. His friends had a history of pranks. Last month, they'd convinced the new guy that he needed to get a permit from City Hall to use a hammer. The month before that, they'd filled his truck bed with packing peanuts. This was just another joke, except this time they'd gone digital. But then the confirmation message came through. Date accepted. Location confirmed. 7-day evaluation period initiated. His lawyer buddy, the one who handled his late father's estate, had looked at the digital contract with increasing concern. Apparently, when Earth joined the galactic community 5 years ago, certain agreements became legally binding across multiple star systems. A digital signature, even an accidental one, counted as consent. Tyler had accidentally agreed to a week-long courtship evaluation, and breaking it could result in fines that would bankrupt him for life. So here he was, sitting in his truck, trying to decide if he should walk in or just drive to another state and hope the aliens forgot about him. His phone buzzed. A message from his foreman: "Good luck, buddy. Try not to get eaten." Very helpful. Tyler took a deep breath, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, and stepped out of the truck. The evening air was cool and the restaurant's warm lights spilled onto the sidewalk. Through the window he could see other diners, all human, all normal, all probably not about to have the weirdest week of their lives. He pushed through the door and that's when he saw her. Commander Therazin stood near the host station like a monument come to life. She was easily 8 feet tall, maybe taller, with deep purple scales that seemed to shimmer under the restaurant's lighting. Her shoulders were broader than any linebacker Tyler had ever seen, and her arms looked like they could crush steel. Military medals covered her chest, arranged in precise rows that spoke of decades of service. She wore what looked like a formal uniform, dark fabric that seemed to absorb light, with golden trim along the edges. But it wasn't just her that made Tyler's heart sink into his stomach. Behind her stood 6 younger versions of herself. 6 daughters, all female, all clearly her offspring. They ranged in height and age from what looked like a teenager barely 5 feet tall to a young adult who stood nearly as tall as her mother. Each one had the same reptilian features, the same powerful build, the same eyes that seemed to track every movement in the room like trained predators. Those eyes locked onto Tyler the moment he walked in. The restaurant had gone quiet. Other diners stared openly. The host looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Tyler Bennett? Commander Therazin's voice was deep and resonant, the kind of voice that could command troops across a battlefield. She stepped forward, and Tyler noticed that each footfall seemed to shake the floor slightly. "I am honored you accepted the courtship contract. Your presence brings respect to both our houses." Tyler's mouth went dry. His brain scrambled for words, any words. What now? Therazin tilted her head slightly as if surprised by the question. "The courtship contract. The 7-day evaluation period begins tonight, as agreed upon in the terms." She gestured to her daughters with one clawed hand. "My offspring must approve of you before we proceed with formal bonding negotiations. This is tradition." One of the middle daughters, her scales a lighter shade of purple than her mother's, leaned toward her sister. She whispered in thickly accented English, clearly not realizing Tyler could hear her. "He smells like fear. But it's controlled. Strange for prey species. Mother said humans were weak, but this one hasn't run yet." The sister responded in their native language, a series of clicks and growls that made other diners shift uncomfortably. Tyler felt his face flush hot, then cold. This was real. This was actually, genuinely, impossibly real. He was standing in an upscale restaurant with an 8-foot alien warrior and her 6 daughters, and apparently he'd legally agreed to let them evaluate him as a potential family member for an entire week. His mind raced through options. He could leave. Just turn around and walk out. But the legal fees would destroy him. He could explain it was a mistake, but would they even care? Different species, different customs. What seemed like an obvious prank to him might be a binding sacred ritual to them. The youngest daughter, barely 4 feet tall with curious silver eyes that seemed too large for her face, tugged on her mother's uniform sleeve. Her voice was softer, almost childlike. "Mother, will he run?" The humans in the training videos always run from larger species. Therazin looked down at her youngest, then back at Tyler. She studied him with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. Her eyes were a deep amber color, ancient and intelligent. "Let us see if humans are truly as adaptable as the reports claim. The galactic community speaks highly of your species' ability to adjust to new circumstances." Tyler stood there, very aware that every person in the restaurant was watching this unfold. His hands were shaking slightly and he shoved them in his pockets. 7 days. He just had to survive 7 days of whatever this evaluation was, and then he'd be free. How bad could it be? He forced his shoulders to relax, loosened his tie, and managed what he hoped was a confident smile. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Well, I'm here now. Might as well make the best of it." The youngest daughter's eyes widened with what might have been surprise. One of the older daughters made a sound that could have been a laugh or a scoff. Tyler couldn't tell which. Commander Therazin's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. A slight nod of acknowledgement. "Come. Our table awaits. We have much to discuss, Tyler Bennett." As Tyler followed the alien family deeper into the restaurant, past staring diners and a very confused waiter, one thought dominated his mind. His buddies at the construction site were never going to believe this. That first dinner should have been the end of it. Tyler had assumed he'd suffer through one awkward meal, sign whatever paperwork would get him out of the contract, and go back to his normal life. But when Commander Therazin announced that the evaluation required him to stay at her family compound for the full 7 days, Tyler realized he'd drastically underestimated what he'd gotten himself into. The compound was unlike anything Tyler had seen before. It sat on the outskirts of the city, sprawling across several acres of land. The architecture was a strange mix of military facility and family home. High walls surrounded the property and guard towers stood at each corner, but inside there were gardens, training yards, and what looked like a normal house, just scaled up for people twice his size. Everything was built larger, heavier, more durable. Even the doors felt like they weighed a ton. His room was in the east wing, and it had clearly been adjusted for human size at the last minute. The bed was still too big, the ceiling still too high, and the bathroom sink required him to stand on his toes to use it properly. The daughters wasted absolutely no time testing him. The morning after his arrival, Kirasin, the oldest daughter who stood nearly 7 feet tall, woke him before dawn. "Combat evaluation begins in 10 minutes, she'd announced, standing in his doorway like a drill sergeant. "Do not be late." Tyler stumbled into the training room wearing borrowed workout clothes that didn't quite fit right. The room was massive, with padded floors and walls lined with weapons he didn't recognize. All 6 daughters stood waiting, already warmed up and ready. The combat simulations were brutal. They used some kind of holographic system that created virtual opponents. Tyler lasted maybe 30 seconds in each round before getting virtually eliminated. The daughters watched with expressions that ranged from disappointment to barely concealed amusement. He couldn't match their speed, couldn't predict their movements, couldn't even understand half the tactical decisions they made instinctively. Again, Kirasin ordered after his 5th failure. "Humans are supposed to be cunning fighters. Show us." Tyler tried. He really did. But by the end of the hour, he was drenched in sweat and nursing a bruised ego. The scoreboard didn't lie. 0 wins. 15 losses. The physical training the next day was somehow worse. What they considered a basic morning routine would have broken most professional athletes. Running laps around the compound while wearing a weighted vest. Climbing walls that seemed designed for people with claws and twice his reach. Strength exercises that made his muscles scream for mercy after the first set. Tyler collapsed after 20 minutes, gasping for air on the training ground while the daughters continued their workout without breaking a sweat. The youngest, who he'd learned was named Nirale, jogged past him and offered water with an expression that might have been pity. "You are very weak," she observed with the blunt honesty of a child. "How do humans survive on your planet?" Tyler was too tired to be offended. "We're really good at ordering pizza," he managed between breaths. That night at dinner the judgment came. The dining hall was formal, with a long table that could seat 20 people. Tyler sat at the far end, feeling very small and very out of place. The food was strange, proteins he couldn't identify and vegetables that definitely didn't grow on Earth, but at least it was edible. Kirasin set down her utensils with a sharp clink that got everyone's attention. Her voice carried authority just like her mother's. Mother was wrong about his species. He cannot fight. He cannot keep pace with basic training. He lacks the physical strength required for even simple tasks. She looked directly at Tyler, her amber eyes cold. What purpose does he serve in this family? The other daughters murmured agreement. Tyler felt his face burn with embarrassment and frustration, but he bit his tongue. He'd spent 3 days learning how this family worked. They were warriors, military through and through. They respected strength, competence, action. Arguments and excuses meant nothing to them. If he tried to defend himself with words, he'd just look weaker. He focused on cutting the tough meat on his plate, keeping his expression neutral even though his pride was taking a beating. Commander Therazin watched the exchange but said nothing. She seemed content to let her daughters form their own opinions. But everything changed on the 4th day. Tyler was in his room, seriously considering how badly those legal fines would actually hurt when the lights flickered. Then they went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in dim red. He heard raised voices from downstairs. When he reached the main hall, the family was gathered around a holographic display showing the compound's power systems. Therazin was giving orders in her native language, her tone clipped and efficient. "What's happening?" Tyler asked. "Storm damaged the primary grid," Kirisin explained dismissively. "Backup systems are active. It is handled." But Tyler moved closer to the display and something caught his eye. He'd worked construction for years, dealt with electrical systems more times than he could count. The backup systems weren't just active, they were failing in sequence. Cascading failure. He'd seen it before on job sites. His blood ran cold when he spotted the medical pod icon in the display. Nirale's medical pod. The youngest daughter had some kind of condition that required constant treatment. The pod was essential. "You've got maybe 15 minutes before that pod loses power," Tyler said, already moving toward the maintenance closet he'd spotted earlier. "The engineers are reviewing solutions," Therazin replied calmly. "They will have the primary grid restored within the hour." "She doesn't have an hour." Tyler grabbed a toolkit, checking the contents quickly. The backup systems are going down one by one. When they hit that medical pod circuit, it's over. Kirisin stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "You are not authorized to access compound systems. You are not trained. Your sister dies in 14 minutes if I don't fix this," Tyler interrupted, meeting her eyes steadily. "You can court-martial me later, throw me in jail, whatever you want. But right now, I'm the only one here who knows how to jury-rig a human power system, and that's what you've got in these walls." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Therazin gave a single sharp nod. "Go." Tyler ran. The maintenance access was behind a panel in the lower level, a cramped space filled with wiring that connected Earth technology with alien systems. It was a mess, and he could see exactly where the problems were. The daughters crowded around the access hatch, watching as Tyler tore into the electrical panel like a man possessed. He started pulling wires, bypassing safety systems, rerouting power from non-critical systems. Every electrician he'd ever worked with would have been screaming at him to stop. "This is insane," Velsha whispered, another of the daughters. "The system will overload. You will cause an explosion." "Maybe," Tyler admitted, sweat dripping into his eyes as he twisted wires together and secured them with electrical tape. "But probably not. 60-40 odds. That is not acceptable risk management," Kirisin protested. "It's better than watching your sister die while we wait for the right solution," Tyler shot back. His hands were shaking, partially from adrenaline, partially from fear that he was about to electrocute himself. He connected the final bypass, offered a quick prayer to whoever might be listening, and flipped the makeshift switch he'd created. The lights flickered once. Twice. Tyler held his breath. Then they stabilized. The normal white lighting returned. From upstairs, he could hear the medical pod systems humming back to life with their normal steady rhythm. Tyler slumped against the wall, his shirt soaked with sweat, his hands still trembling. "On Earth we call that percussive maintenance," he muttered. "Hit it until it works." Commander Therazin knelt down to look into the maintenance space, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice held something Tyler hadn't heard before. "Respect maybe. Or at least curiosity. You used chaos. Controlled chaos. You broke every safety protocol, violated every standard procedure, and somehow achieved success." Tyler managed a weak laugh. "Welcome to humanity. We're really good at breaking rules in exactly the right way." Kirisin stared at the makeshift repairs with an expression caught between horror and fascination. The other daughters exchanged glances, something shifting in how they looked at the exhausted humans sitting in their maintenance tunnel. Maybe he couldn't fight like them. Maybe he couldn't keep up with their training. But he'd just done something none of them could have done, using nothing but improvisation, guts, and a refusal to accept defeat. For the first time since arriving, Tyler felt like maybe, just maybe, he belonged there after all. The days following the power grid incident were different. Tyler noticed it immediately. The daughters no longer looked through him like he was furniture. Now they actually acknowledged his presence, asked him questions, even seemed curious about how humans thought. Nirale, the youngest, became particularly attached to him. She'd find him in the compound's common areas and drag him into helping with her homework. The education system for their species was intense, covering subjects that made Tyler's head spin. Advanced mathematics, military strategy, xenobiology. But sometimes she'd get stuck on problems that required creative thinking rather than memorized formulas. One afternoon, she sat cross-legged on the floor with her study tablet, her small face scrunched up in concentration. "Tyler, how did you know the power fix would work? The calculations said it should have failed." Tyler set down the earth coffee he'd finally convinced Therazin to import for him. "Honestly? I didn't know for sure. I just knew the odds of it working were better than the odds of your medical pod staying online if I did nothing." Nirale tilted her head, her silver eyes reflecting genuine confusion. "But that is not logical. If the calculations show failure, you should not attempt." "Sometimes logic isn't enough," Tyler explained, trying to find the right words. "Sometimes you have to trust your gut, your experience, and be willing to take a risk. Doing something, even if it might fail, is better than doing nothing and guaranteeing failure." She seemed to consider this, her tail twitching the way it did when she was thinking hard. "Humans are very strange." "Yeah, we get that a lot," Tyler chuckled. The moment of peace shattered when the alarms blared throughout the compound. Tyler had never heard that particular sound before, but the way everyone immediately tensed told him it was serious. Within seconds, the entire family was moving with military precision toward the command center. Tyler followed, his heart rate already climbing. The command center was a room he'd only glimpsed before, filled with holographic displays and communication equipment that looked decades beyond anything Earth had. Therazin stood at the center console, her expression hard as she pulled up tactical information. "Report," she commanded, and one of the displays flickered to show an aerial view of a settlement about 20 miles away. An officer's voice came through the speakers, tense and clipped. "Raiders hitting Settlement 7. Farming community, minimal defensive capabilities. 300 civilians. They've breached the outer perimeter." Tyler moved closer to get a better look at the display. He could see red markers indicating enemy positions, moving steadily toward the center of the settlement where the civilians had presumably taken shelter. The settlement itself looked peaceful, agricultural buildings and homes arranged in neat patterns. Completely unprepared for a military assault. Therazin's military training was evident in every movement as she assessed the situation. Her fingers flew across the console, pulling up additional data. "Orbital support has been notified. Estimated arrival time 28 minutes. We hold position and wait for proper backup." 28 minutes. Tyler's eyes tracked the enemy movement patterns on the display. They were moving fast, organized, clearly experienced raiders. And there, in the center of the settlement, was a population counter. 300 people, including families, kids probably. The attack patterns showed the raiders would breach the civilian shelters in roughly 10 minutes. His stomach twisted. 28 minutes might as well be 28 hours. "We don't have 28 minutes, Tyler said quietly. The room went silent. Every eye turned to him, including Therazin's. He could feel the weight of their stares, the surprise that he'd spoken up during a military briefing. Tyler stepped closer to the display, pointing at the movement patterns. "With respect, Commander, those people don't have time for protocol. Look at the raider advancement. They'll breach those shelters in 10 minutes, maybe less. By the time orbital support arrives, it'll be a recovery mission, not a rescue." Therazin's expression didn't change, but he saw something flicker in her eyes. She knew he was right. "But," Tyler continued, his mind already working through possibilities, "if we move now, if we use their own aggression against them, we can buy enough time. They're moving fast because they don't expect resistance. We can use that." "Explain," Therazin commanded, her voice carrying that tone that said she was listening, really listening. Tyler's hands moved across the console, highlighting positions on the map. "They're funneling through these approach routes, right? Standard raider tactics, overwhelm with speed. But look at the terrain here and here. These buildings create natural choke points. If we hit them from these angles, force them to slow down and regroup, we buy time. We don't need to win, just need to hold them until orbital support arrives." He could see it clearly in his mind, the kind of desperate defensive action that wouldn't make sense in any military textbook but might just work in reality. Use the damaged farming equipment as barriers, turn the raiders' speed against them, create chaos in their organized assault. Kirisin made a sound that was almost a hiss. This is suicide. You are talking about 6 warriors against a raider force of at least 40. The tactical disadvantage is massive. No, Tyler corrected, meeting Tharazin's gaze directly. It's a calculated risk. There's a difference. Suicide is throwing yourselves at them with no plan. This is using terrain, timing, and the element of surprise. They expect farmers. They won't expect trained warriors hitting them from unexpected angles. The plan was aggressive, relied on split-second timing, and required using damaged equipment as improvised weapons. Every aspect of it violated military doctrine he was sure these warriors had trained on for years. But it was also the only plan that didn't involve listening to 300 people die over the communications channel while they waited for proper support. Velsha, one of the middle daughters, studied the display with narrowed eyes. The humans' plan requires we split our force. We would need to trust that each unit can hold their position without support. That's exactly what we need to do, Tyler agreed. Trust each other, trust the plan, and move fast. Commander Therazin stood silent for a long moment, her eyes moving between the display, her daughters, and Tyler. He could almost see her weighing military protocol against the reality of the situation. Then she noticed something, her head tilting slightly. That scent. Tyler's scent had changed. Not fear, which had been there that first night at the restaurant. This was something different. Something that reminded her of the old stories, of apex predators from death worlds who didn't back down when facing impossible odds. Determination. That was the word. Pure, focused determination. We move in 2 minutes, Therazin decided, her voice cutting through the tension. Daughters, gear up immediately. Combat loadout, standard formation. And someone find the human a weapon. The room exploded into motion. The daughters rushed to the armory, their movements efficient and practiced. Tyler felt adrenaline dump into his system, his hands steady despite the situation. This was happening. This was really happening. On Earth we have a saying, Tyler called out as they moved. Fortune favors the bold. Velsha paused at the armory door, grabbing a plasma rifle and tossing it to Tyler with more force than necessary. He caught it, the weight familiar enough despite the alien technology. She fixed him with a hard stare, her voice deadly serious. Let us hope your fortune holds, human. Because if you get my sisters killed with this insane plan, I will end you myself. Tyler checked the weapons charge indicator, finding the safety mechanism and power settings with surprising ease. Years of handling tools and equipment translated well enough. He looked up at Velsha and nodded. Fair enough. Then I better make sure this works. The transport vehicle screamed across the terrain toward Settlement 7, with Therazin at the controls and Tyler gripping his seat as they bounced over rough ground. The daughters were checking their weapons, their faces set in expressions of calm determination that Tyler envied. His own heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. They arrived at the settlement's edge in under 8 minutes. Tyler could already hear weapons fire in the distance, see smoke rising from damaged buildings. The raiders had pushed deeper than the initial reports showed. What happened in the next 20 minutes would be talked about in military academies for years to come, though Tyler wouldn't know that until much later. The moment they reached the first position, Tyler's plan went into action. He'd positioned Kirisin and Velsha on the left flank, hidden behind what remained of a grain storage building. Therazin took the center with 2 other daughters, while Tyler and Nirale moved to coordinate the civilian evacuation and set up the traps he'd outlined. The raiders moved with confidence, their weapons advanced and their tactics brutal. They were experienced fighters, the kind who'd done this dozens of times before. They expected frightened farmers, maybe a local security guard or 2. Easy targets. They didn't expect what hit them. Tyler watched the raider advance through a cracked window, counting silently. Timing was everything. He'd positioned an old farming hauler at just the right angle. One damaged building was already unstable from their initial assault. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. Left flank now. Tyler's voice cut through the chaos on their communication channel. Kirisin and Velsha moved without hesitation, trusting the humans' timing completely. They emerged from cover and opened fire, their plasma weapons lighting up the evening air. The raiders instinctively turned toward the threat, clustering together, moving exactly where Tyler needed them. He hit the control for the farming hauler. The massive vehicle lurched forward, its automated systems still functional despite the damage. The raiders scattered, but they scattered right into the kill zone in front of the unstable building. Therazin didn't need orders. She fired at the building's support column, the one Tyler had marked. The structure collapsed with a groan of tortured metal and concrete, creating an instant barrier and cutting the raider force in half. The raiders who'd been so confident moments before suddenly found themselves confused, separated, and facing opponents who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Tyler was already moving to the next position. The daughters finally understood what they were seeing. Tyler wasn't stronger than the raiders. He definitely wasn't faster. But he was completely unpredictable. While the raiders fought with standard mercenary tactics, and the daughters fought with precision military doctrine, Tyler fought like someone who'd learned strategy from action movies and construction site problem solving. Every disadvantage became a weapon in his hands. That damaged water tower? He collapsed it to flood an approach route. Those civilian vehicles? Mobile cover that could be moved to create new defensive positions. That pile of farming equipment? Improvised barriers that made the raiders slow down and bunch up. He rallied the civilians too, and that might have been the most impressive part. These were farmers, families, people who'd probably never held a weapon in their lives. They were terrified, hiding in their shelters while hell rained down outside. But when Tyler burst into the main shelter, his voice was steady and confident. "Okay folks, listen up. We've got trained warriors out there buying us time, but we need your help. I need 10 people who can drive. 20 who can carry supplies. Everyone else, you're going to the emergency bunker on the east side. Move with purpose, stay calm, and trust me when I say we've got this." That confidence was infectious. That inexplicable human ability to project certainty even in the middle of chaos. People started moving, following his clear commands, organizing themselves into groups. Within minutes, he had civilian drivers moving vehicles to reinforce positions, others setting up medical stations, everyone contributing instead of just cowering in fear. The raiders had never faced anything like it. Their standard hit-and-run tactics fell apart against defenders who refused to behave predictably. When orbital support finally arrived, their massive ships dropping from the sky with weapons hot, the raiders were already in full retreat. They'd lost equipment, taken casualties, and gained absolutely nothing except a hard lesson about underestimating settlements that seemed easy targets. But victory came with a price, and Tyler paid it. In the chaos of the final push, a raider broke through their defensive line. He was aiming for Nirale, who'd been helping coordinate communications and hadn't seen him coming. Tyler didn't think. He just moved, putting himself between the weapon and the youngest daughter. The plasma burn hit him in the side, and the pain was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It felt like someone had pressed a white-hot iron against his ribs and held it there. He felt his legs give out, but his brain stayed sharp enough to keep issuing orders. Kirasin, Raider at Section 4. Velsha, cover the medical team. Therazin, you've got command. His voice was steady even as blood soaked through his shirt. Casualties to the center shelter. Someone needs to coordinate with orbital support for medical supplies. Then the adrenaline ran out and Tyler collapsed. He had fragmented memories of the medical center. Bright lights. Voices speaking in worried tones. Pain that came and went in waves. And through it all, someone holding his hand with surprising gentleness. When his awareness returned more fully, Tyler found himself in a medical bed that was slightly too large for him. Medical equipment he didn't recognize surrounded him, monitoring vitals and probably doing things Earth medicine could only dream about. Therazin knelt beside the bed, her massive frame somehow seeming gentle in the sterile medical room. Her daughters gathered around, and Tyler noticed that several of them had minor injuries too. Battle scars they wore with pride. Nirale was holding his hand, her small clawed fingers surprisingly careful. Her young face was streaked with tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. "You are awake," she said, her voice small. "We thought. The doctor said humans are fragile. Hard to kill," Tyler managed, his voice rough. "Takes more than that." Kirasin stepped forward, and Tyler was surprised to see her expression. The contempt from days earlier was completely gone, replaced with something that looked like respect. "He is not what I expected," she admitted softly, speaking to her mother. "He is no warrior by our standards. He cannot match our strength or speed. Yet he fights like death itself cannot stop him." Velsha nodded, and there was something new in her voice too. "He saved the settlement. Saved us. His tactics were insane, violated every principle we were taught, and somehow worked perfectly." Therazin placed her clawed hand on Tyler's shoulder with surprising gentleness. "He did more than that, daughters. He reminded us what we have forgotten." Nirale looked up at her mother, her silver eyes still wet. What is that, Mother? Therazin watched Tyler's chest rise and fall, steady despite the injuries. That true strength is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. It is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. It is finding solutions where logic says none exist. She met Tyler's eyes. This is the way of humans. This is why they matter in the galaxy. This is why I chose to bring one into our family. Tyler managed a weak smile. Does this mean I passed the evaluation? Despite everything, despite the tension and the pain and the exhaustion, the daughters laughed. Even Kirisin cracked a smile. Yes, human, Therazin said warmly. You pass. Tyler woke to find 6 alien faces staring down at him with expressions ranging from relief to curiosity to something that might have been affection. For a moment, his brain struggled to catch up with where he was and why everything hurt. You are awake, Nirale announced, stating the obvious in that way kids do. Her small hand was still wrapped around his, squeezing gently. You have been unconscious for 2 days. The doctor said your body needed time to heal. We have been taking turns sitting with you. 2 days. Tyler tried to process that. The last thing he clearly remembered was the pain in his side and making sure everyone got to safety. Everything after that was a blur of lights and voices. Feels like it, Tyler groaned, trying to sit up and immediately regretting it. Every muscle in his body protested the movement. Did everyone make it? The settlement, the civilians? Kirisin stepped closer to the bed, and Tyler noticed she was looking at him differently. The dismissive expression she'd worn for the first few days was completely gone. The settlement stands because of you. The raiders fled once they realized they were fighting a coordinated defense instead of scared farmers. Total casualties were minimal. 3 injured civilians, all stable. No deaths. Your tactics saved 300 lives, Velsha added, her tone carrying genuine respect. The Settlement Council has already named you an honorary citizen. They want to build a statue. Tyler couldn't help but laugh, then immediately regretted it as pain shot through his side. A statue? That's ridiculous. I just did what needed doing. That is precisely the human attitude we needed to see, another daughter chimed in. Therazin entered the medical room, her military bearing evident in every step, but there was something gentler in her expression now. She moved to sit beside Tyler's bed, her massive frame somehow careful and considerate of the space. Tyler Bennett, she began formally, and all the daughters straightened at her tone. My daughters have convened and reached a unanimous decision. They have declared you worthy. This is the highest honor in our culture. You have earned a permanent place in this house if you choose to accept it. Tyler blinked, trying to make sense of what he was hearing through the lingering fog of pain medication. Wait, what about the whole courtship contract thing? The bonding negotiations? Therazin's expression shifted to something that might have been embarrassment, which was strange to see on such an imposing warrior. I must confess something to you. I was not entirely truthful about my intentions when I created that profile. Tyler waited, suddenly very curious about where this was going. I did not seek a romantic mate, Therazin continued, her voice careful. I sought a teacher. Specifically, I sought a human teacher for my daughters. She explained that the situation with her people had been troubling her for years. They had become rigid, locked into ways of thinking that had worked for centuries but were failing in a rapidly changing galaxy. Military doctrine, traditional problem-solving, respect for protocol, all valuable things but not enough anymore. We had forgotten how to adapt, Therazin said, looking at each of her daughters in turn. We had forgotten that sometimes the best solution is the one that breaks the rules. We had lost our ability to innovate, to think creatively under pressure. My daughters are brilliant warriors, but I feared they would enter a galaxy that required more than just combat skills. So you deliberately looked for a human, Tyler said, understanding dawning. Because we're chaos incarnate. Because you are adaptable, Therazin corrected. Because your species has turned improvisation into an art form. Because you face impossible situations with humor and determination rather than rigid protocol. Tyler looked at the 6 daughters gathered around his bed. Warriors who had gone from viewing him with contempt to actually caring whether he lived or died. You want me to teach them to break rules? I want you to teach them to think like humans, Therazin said firmly. To solve problems creatively. To face fear with courage and yes, even humor. To understand that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the strongest action is the one that makes no logical sense but works anyway. What if I mess it up? Tyler asked. I'm just a construction worker. I'm not a teacher or a tactician or whatever you think I am. Velsha made a sound that was almost a laugh. Then you will improvise. It is what humans do, yes. You will figure it out as you go, make mistakes, and somehow succeed anyway. They spent the next hour working out the details. Tyler would stay at the compound, not as a romantic partner but as what they called a family consultant. He would help prepare the daughters for a galaxy that valued adaptation and creative thinking. In return, they would teach him their combat techniques, their discipline, their knowledge of the wider galactic community. It was not the kind of arrangement any culture's dating contract typically resulted in, but it was perfectly human. Taking an absurd situation and turning it into something meaningful through sheer determination and willingness to make it work. Months passed, and the compound transformed into something that bridged two very different cultures. Tyler found himself standing in the garage on a warm afternoon, teaching Nirale the finer points of mechanical repair using what he called the human method. The hoverbike in front of them was technically advanced, but it had broken down in a way that the official repair manual said required complete replacement of a core component. Okay, so the manual says this part is sealed and non-serviceable, Tyler explained, wrapping duct tape around a connection joint. But what the manual doesn't know is that sometimes you just need to convince the parts to work together. This is insane, Nirale observed, but she was grinning. You are using primitive adhesive materials on advanced technology. And it's gonna work, Tyler assured her. Hit that power switch. The hoverbike hummed to life, its systems engaging perfectly despite the unconventional repair. The other daughters had gathered to watch, as they often did when Tyler was teaching. They threw out suggestions, debated techniques, and occasionally made fun of his more ridiculous solutions. But they were learning, absorbing not just the techniques but the mindset behind them. Therazin watched from the garage doorway, observing her family working together in ways that would have been unthinkable before the human arrived. They laughed at Tyler's terrible jokes. They debated enthusiastically rather than simply following protocol. They had learned to question, to experiment, to embrace controlled chaos. News feeds across 3 sectors still discussed what they called the human gambit, and military academies from multiple species had requested human consultants to teach unconventional tactics. Tyler had even been interviewed twice, though he'd felt ridiculous trying to explain that he'd just done what seemed obvious. But for Tyler, none of that mattered as much as what he'd found here. "Hey, Commander," he called out, wiping grease on his jeans in a way that made Velsha cringe. "We still on for family dinner tonight? I'm making something called pizza. Fair warning, it's gonna violate about 6 health codes and possibly several treaties, but it'll be worth it." Kirisin groaned dramatically. "Not another human food experiment. Last time you nearly poisoned us. You loved the tacos." Tyler protested. "I was being polite," Kirisin lied, though everyone could see she was fighting a smile. She headed toward the house to wash up. The daughters filed inside, arguing about pizza toppings with the kind of comfortable bickering that only families could manage. Tyler started to follow, but Therazin caught his arm gently. "Thank you," she said simply, her deep voice quiet. "For showing them what matters. For teaching them to adapt. For becoming part of this family." Tyler smiled, feeling warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "On Earth we say family isn't always what you expect. It's who shows up when it matters. Thanks for letting me show up, even if it started as an accident." From inside the house, Nirale's voice rang out with urgency. "Tyler. Velsha says pineapple does not belong on pizza. She's objectively wrong." Tyler yelled back, grinning as he jogged toward the chaos. "Pineapple is a perfectly valid topping." Therazin stood in the doorway, watching her strange, improvised family laugh and argue and simply exist together. She realized that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their tactics or even their adaptability. It was their ability to find connection in the most unexpected places and make it work through sheer determination, heart, and willingness to embrace the absurd. The galaxy was changing, becoming more complex and unpredictable every day. And maybe, Therazin thought as she heard Tyler's laughter mixing with her daughter's voices, that was exactly what it needed. Not more rigid protocols, but more beings willing to adapt, to improvise, to turn chaos into family. She stepped inside to join them, ready to see what kind of disaster Tyler's pizza would be this time.